Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Samwise Yaboinski podcast. It is great to have you back. Sam, how are you?
I'm very well, Chris. How are you?
I'm doing good. The sun has just come out. It's been cold still, but now we just have these moments, these peaking moments of spring, and that's always exciting. It's been really great to be back. It's a Sunday, so we're just fresh off of church, which turns out is sort of good for you.
Still feeling
nice.
That vibe from church.
Yeah. Exactly.
Riding the vibe from earlier.
And we are excited to have Jess Hicks with us today for so many reasons. Jess is one of these incredible volunteers who's done so many different things, and I'm working together with in so many different ways right now. But has lots and lots and lots to share. And so we're really excited to have you here. Thanks for coming.
Welcome, Jess.
Thank you. Thank you both. It's so good to see you today.
Yeah. And so we've been starting off with just hearing a little bit of how you came to First Church, how you came to Unitarian Universalism, sort of what was the journey that brought you here.
So we moved to Belmont about 10 years ago from Somerville. And our children were young then. We had two that were turning 8 the day that we moved in. And we had our youngest was 5. So we wanted to get them into the community very quickly. And we asked around a few neighbors, how do we get to know people? You know, they're going to start school in the fall, but we don't know anybody. And they said, well, you might want to try First Church, especially since your kids are into music. There's this great music program there. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds good, right? So we contacted the church, and Alpha got her hooks into us right away. She was like, ooh, 3. Okay, yes. So we were in that very first musical. She made an exception. Usually she doesn't take the kindergartners, or at that time she didn't take kindergartners for the musicals, but Hank was in the musicals as well. We had 3 junior inquisitors because it was the Mikado that year. Yep. And that was all it took, right? So instantly I knew all of these parents. Alpha did not let you not volunteer for a lot of things. So if your kids were in the play, you were sort of in the play, right? So that was the start. From there, I can't remember who was doing like the person who helped us sign the book. Oh my goodness. I can't believe I can't remember his name.
Jim Staten. Yeah.
Jim. Yeah. Yes. Them met us pretty quickly thereon, and mentioned the book, and we're like, we don't usually sign things, but okay, we'll just sign the book, because he was so nice and he was so welcoming. So we signed the book without even realizing what we were doing. Wow. I mean, we knew, but without giving it a ton of thought, we're like, yeah, we'll sign the book. The kids are in, we're in, and that was all it took. We really loved that welcome, and it really felt very good for the kids. The kids did know a lot of other children at school starting out, which was great because, the twins were starting in 3rd grade, and a lot of friendships are already made, and they were the new kids, but they didn't feel like the new kids when they started.
Yeah. And where did they go to school?
They were at the Burbank.
And then had you been Unitarian Universalist before, or was that new here?
So I grew up Catholic, but there's an asterisk on that. We'll have to talk about that a little bit. And then when I met Fred was a very, I like to say like a religious atheist. Like he's very dedicated to atheism. So we knew that we were going to have to find something very special if we were going to go into it together. And if we were going to indoctrinate our children into something, it would have to be very special.
Yeah.
So before we even knew that we were going to have kids, Fred and I have been together forever. So before we even knew we were going to have kids, we went to all these different churches together in the area. We lived in Somerville, so we went to some Quaker things. We went to a UU church in Medford. We went to a couple of churches in Davis Square, just all over the place trying to find the place. And we didn't find the place until we had that extra push from having kids and moving to the new town. And of the things we had tried, Fred really liked the Quaker church. There's a couple of different flavors of Quaker, right? So he really liked the one where you just go sit and be quiet.
Yeah.
But he found that he could sort of just sit and be quiet at the UU church, and that was going to work for him pretty well. And
yeah.
He loved the music,
the Quakers.
All the things that we hear about our church that are special.
Yeah. So wait, what's the asterisk?
About Catholicism? Oh my
I'm
goodness.
going to say like the cathasterix or
So I grew up in Florida, in Central Florida, in the 70s. And it was not a very diverse place at the time. I mean, there was at my school about half Black students and about half white students. But beyond that, there was not a lot of diversity. So a lot of diversity, but in one direction, right?
Yeah.
Being Catholic was to be an outsider down there, which is a completely different thing for people who've grown up just about anywhere else. It seems like, certainly compared to here. We still had occasionally people breaking into our church and vandalizing things. And I still was bullied at school when kids would find out that I was Catholic. I was called an idolater and all of that stuff.
An idolater.
I was an idolater. I was going to go to hell. I was told this. I was like a third grader. I remember this as a third grader, right?
And look at you now, even more idolatrous.
Oh my goodness. I wish the Podland could see. I have my idols all next to me. This is my yoga room that I'm in. And I've got them all lined up. Yeah.
But not to make fun of it. That must be hard when you're little to be, called anything, but then especially something like that. It's like,
it was really
hell. Yeah, it's intense.
It was really hard, and it was really scary because their versions of hell in Southern Protestant churches are no joke, right? And so when they would tell me what that meant for me as a young, impressionable thing, that's terrifying,
Yeah.
But the actual part that is interesting is because I had this sort of like, well, I love the church, I love the organ, I love the stained glass. I loved the ritual of going to church. I did not love Sunday school, where we were not encouraged to ask questions or have thoughts that were outside of what they were telling us to think. If I wanted to skip church, my father, who was also not really Catholic, only Catholic so that my parents could get married, would let me skip Sunday school and church if I read a religious book from another faith. And he had all these books, not all, but, a small little space on a bookshelf of books that I could read instead of Sunday school. So I almost had my own building bridges that I could go to.
Sounds like
as a little kid.
Do you remember any of the books?
I read, I struggled through, oh my goodness, the one that everybody reads about the autobiography of a yogi, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I should have brought my list of titles. There was a Gibran. You're going to definitely have to edit
Gibran.
You're going to sound really smart. Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah, Khalil
Gibran.
Yes.
Like
and it was like poems and like religious poems.
Yeah,
Palestinian.
What a fascinating parenting technique to be like, you can skip this church that I kind of don't like, but only if you read these books that I really do like.
Oh my goodness. And Chris, I lived on a farm. I lived on a working farm. This was our family's homestead because Florida was like the West. You could get a Homestead Act in the late 1800s. And our family did that. And so we had what was left of this family farm with orange groves and there was a cedar grove. And I would take the book and I would go sit outside under a tree.
Oh my God.
And
orange trees are my favorite. Sam, have you ever been in a place with orange trees?
I have actually. Yeah, actually in Orange County in California.
beautiful smell. I lived in a house that had this huge, amazing orange tree. And I want to say it had oranges most of the year. I mean, it was really in Central Valley of California. Oh my God, it was the most beautiful smelling, tasting, just amazing. I can only imagine a whole grove. Wow.
So I'm reading these religious books with the perfume of the orange blossoms in the shade of the tree, enfolded in the arms of these ancient trees that I loved. They weren't that ancient, but to me, they were ancient.
Yeah.
And it was so much better than going to church. Sorry. Oh my goodness. It was so much better than going to church.
That church. That's basically
that church.
Yeah.
Wow. And is that sort of the beginning of your yoga journey then too, right?
Yes.
And kind of philosophically anyway.
Yes. So I was reading, I had read the Yoga Sutras as part of that.
Wow.
And I had read some of Bhagavad Gita, but I'm a little kid, so I wasn't reading. Please don't think that I was reading a whole entire text. But if I read a chapter, that counted as Sunday school for the day, right? I had, and Carlos Castaneda, he's another one that my dad really liked. And so I was reading all of these weird, trippy things too, that also I found to be quite scary. But being exposed to all of these different kinds of ideas, I was already doing comparative religions, which became a real passion of mine sort of throughout. Like you can follow a thread. To today. And then when I got to be about 16, I realized that I didn't have a typical body and I was experiencing a lot of pain in my physical body. And did some yoga and realized that that was really helpful for the pain, the physical pain. And then also realized, and it's also helping with just the stress of being a teenager and being kind of an outsider in my small town, very small town. I just felt so much better after doing the physical practice of yoga too. So I had up till that point only sort of studied the philosophy of yoga, but once I started doing yoga too, I was hooked. So that's where the physical practice of yoga came in. I kind of did it backward compared to other people in the States, right? Often people come into yoga with the physical practice and then realize there's so much more to it. If you want to go there, I did it the other way. I was reading about it and then did it.
Yeah. I ended up doing, so when I was in college at Boston University, I had, all the yoga was free, right? And so you signed up for all this yoga. So I was doing yoga 4 or 5 times a week, just found this great teacher. But the teacher, fascinatingly, was sort of a frustrated Zen Buddhist teacher. So she really wanted to be a meditation teacher. So all of the yoga had just this huge Zen Buddhist sort of flavor to it. And that was where she really, anyway, it was all woven, both experiences. It was all the physical stuff but all the meditative bits too, but none of it really grounded in actual, yoga. It was all of the spiritual stuff. It's just totally Buddhist. Anyway, which is super fascinating. So wait, but it was great that you had yoga in, Central Florida. I mean, that's not a given.
I was doing it from a book. This was not, there was nowhere to take from. So I had a book with photos in it. One of the books that I had as a text when I was a little kid even was, died recently, Iyengar. His book that has all of the postures, and it's almost like a encyclopedia of yoga postures. And then he also at the end has these lists of poses that he recommends, right? So not a terribly safe way to learn yoga, but it was the only option I had to just dive into his pictures. And I didn't even really have a mirror, so I didn't know if I looked like but that's what I was doing. That was all I had.
So when did you have a teacher?
I had a teacher sort of off and on like you in college. We didn't have as much yoga offered at college as you did, but I took yoga classes at college. That was my first teacher in person at college. Yeah. I also had like a VHS tape of yoga. That's dating me. And then eventually upgraded to DVDs. But yeah, that's how I came to yoga.
That's super fascinating.
I came to meditation in a similar way. Actually, since you mentioned meditation has been a huge, important part of the last couple of decades for me. And I always think that this is worth telling folks, because I started meditating by just reading books about meditating and thought that I was meditating, and realized only after doing that for about 10 years, oh, wait, this is not, like, thinking about meditating is not meditating, and reading about meditating is not meditating. Same thing with the yoga. Like, I was reading about it, but I wasn't doing it.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading about meditating, but I wasn't doing it. And doing it just opened up this whole new reality.
So what's the tradition of meditation that you practice? Is there a particular tradition that you have an affinity with, or that you follow?
I've tried lots of things. I started with like John Kabat-Zinn style mindfulness that was intentionally separated from sort of the spiritual and the religious, and found that wasn't really, I mean, it worked for me for a while, but I was having all of this stuff come up emotionally that I didn't feel was getting, I wasn't processing it. It wasn't getting easier or better. Not that meditation has to, right? But I felt like there was this real sticking point around, okay, I'm embodied and I'm noticing and I'm aware, but there's all this really difficult stuff that I've saved up for decades that I haven't gotten through. And I wasn't getting through it with those techniques, even though I had teachers, I was doing the thing. And the piece that changed all of that for me was getting into metta meditation, the loving kindness meditation. And through, I had a process. I mean, I tried to do self-compassion first, because that was what my teacher advised. You have to learn to love yourself before you can do the world and all the other beings that you wish loving kindness towards. But I had, again, just a real sticking point with that loving myself part. I had a lot of stuff that I needed to work through. So I was able to come sort of, again, kind of a back door. I feel like I spent a long time offering the loving kindness to the other beings. That felt much more natural to me. And then my teacher said, oh, you know that when you wish loving kindness to all beings, you're one of them. And I was like, wait, what? You've been wishing loving kindness to yourself this whole time. And I'm like, oh. So that was the door there for that one.
You're like, may all beings but me be free of...
Right? And I was teaching it then too. And so, it was really an interesting moment to be sitting with a group of folks who were deep in Shavasana. They're like blissing out, and I miss teaching in person. Like we were saying, you were missing being in church in person, right? Because you can feel when people are dropping into that state, and you help each other drop into that state. I was feeling that compassion from them, and I was feeling my compassion for them. And it was all getting sort of like this beautiful sort of symphony of compassion. And then that little message from my teacher hit.
Yeah.
At one of those moments, I was just, ruminating on that thought. And I'm like, oh, this feeling.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Oh, totally. I love metta. So I was sort of mostly grounded in Vipassana, or like insight meditation, and metta is a big piece of that, and a big practice. And I found, especially during the pandemic, during these last many months, that's been just a big piece, especially when I've felt, most adrift or most kind of wobbly. That's just kind of where I would start, is just with loving kindness meditation. There's even a video, not to plug the YouTube page, but there's a video where I sort of lead folks through, if people want to check it out. But there's also, I mean, even if you just Google it, like, Jack Kornfield, lots of folks have really nice, but I love that dynamic of being able to really focus on individual folks, and then, all beings, and then yourself. It's such a nice, really grounded practice.
Yeah, you're right. It helps me so much whenever things are hard. I survived on it when I had my cancer diagnosis. I, big things like that in an MRI when or a CAT scan when they're looking for cancer.
Wow.
You can do this practice, and it is incredible. Just incredible. It's the strongest thing I've had since I was a little kid who firmly believed that my Hail Mary was working, right? Like, it's like that. It really feels akin to that to me.
I love, this is sort of a silly moment, but I love that the Hail Mary is also that desperation pass in football, because it's like this super grounded Catholic spiritual practice, but it's also this like, hopefully very little chance this is going to work kind of pass. But it's funny that it's become the same thing. So wait, you mentioned the cancer. When was that?
Yeah, how long ago was that?
That was 2015.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh my.
So a long time ago and not long ago. Anybody who's a cancer survivor understands this, right? Like, so that was cancer of my tongue. This pertains to church life too, because I had out of nowhere, still nobody knows why, just one of those rolls of the dice that didn't turn out well for me. A sore on the tongue. Dentist told me it was nothing. I was, grinding my teeth or whatever. And I was at a meditation retreat, a 10-day meditation silent retreat. And I was just like, I can't stop thinking about this sore on my tongue. I'm doing the metta practice. I'm trying to get through, but there were just signs during the meditation practice, just like, I don't know, in like a a Bugs Bunny cartoon of like arrows pointing, flashing lights, like you have to attend to this. There is something going on. So when I went and was more insistent with the doctor, he was like, well, we'll take a biopsy, but it's nothing. And then it was cancer. Everybody was surprised. It was horrible. But if I hadn't been at that retreat and hadn't had the time to really listen to what my body was telling me, I could have had a different outcome, I think. We caught it in time. It was still early, even though I had this sore for a while.
Wow.
But I had to stop singing with the choir. That's why it relates to church too. So I had to stop teaching. When I was about to go under the knife, the surgeon told me, we don't know if you'll be able to speak or swallow or eat when you come out, because we don't know how much cancer there is. And they're like, okay, so count backwards from 100, you're going under. And I'm like, wait. Like, it was so terrifying.
Wow.
But I came out and it was it was about a quarter of my tongue, and they were able to do the surgery so that the articulation and the chewing and swallowing all still worked. But
wow.
The healing process is such that they can't put stitches in everything because they want the tongue to still be pliable. And I know, right?
Wow.
So I had a long recovery of not being able to talk. So I was sitting on my couch. People from the church showed up. They made one of those chains. I can't remember.
Meal train.
Yeah. So people were bringing the casseroles, and people were showing up and driving my kids to like Kung Fu practice. And it was incredible the way people turned out. But the thing that I missed and wanted to get back to so much was the teaching, the yoga teaching, but also singing. And when I finally got the clearance to sing, I went back to the choir, and we were working on the song, How Can I Keep From Singing?
Oh, right.
So the whole practice, I'm just like quietly, like tears streaming. And
wow, I can just imagine. That must have been a very moving moment.
That's amazing. All clear. I had to keep going every month or so to get checked up to make sure.
Wow.
All okay. Still all okay. Survivor.
Wow. So you've been through a lot. That's a lot.
Yeah. But that meditation practice, I couldn't do yoga because you can't put your head lower than your heart while you're recovering from something where you might bleed. I did yoga. I did, seated yoga, but I couldn't do my normal, usual practice. The metta was what got me through, waiting for doctors, the waiting during cancer treatment is so awful. Waiting to hear, what did the biopsy show? What did that CAT scan show? All of that I got through with metta.
That's amazing. And so then when did you go back to school that you're in now?
Which school? The school that is work, or the school that is grad school?
The school that is grad school.
The school that is grad school. So through COVID, I realized I could not be in my house with all of my people all the time, which sounds awful, but I think everybody out there in the world knows what I mean.
Yeah, a lot of us made that same discovery.
Please.
So I decided I needed to heed the call from the school department here in town. They needed bodies in the schools to sit for teachers who couldn't come back. So teachers were still going to be remote, but kids were starting to come back hybrid. And I know you asked me about grad school, but actually it's through going back to work, that this kind of work, that I decided to go to grad school. So I went and I sat in the classroom while a teacher delivered content to students who were physically with me, but the teacher was distant through the computer. And I made sure that they were wearing masks and that they were, paying attention as they could to this chemistry teacher at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for that entire hybrid season and realized, wow, I'm really enjoying being with students again and being out of the house again. But what I'd really like to do is go back to psychology, which is what I did study for undergrad. So I looked into programs. At that time, there were a lot of online only programs, which is really the only way, especially during COVID, but really just with a busy life, the only way I could get back into school and meet all of the requirements. So so I'm in a master's degree program now for clinical mental health counseling. I'm finishing in my first year. So I'll probably be done by the end of next spring. I have to do an internship and then I'll be ready to have a different career.
Wow. And how, you want to go into kind of private practice, or what kind of what does that look like? What you want to do after?
It's really cool. I can do I'm on a path where I can get a school adjustment counselor license, so I can work in schools and also be licensed to have private practice.
Okay.
So because I've enjoyed working with adolescents again at the high school, I really enjoy working with them. I didn't want to give that up to go and have a private practice somewhere. So this is kind of like the best of both worlds. And I can do this for a bit. And when it's time to slow down, I can keep a couple of clients here and there, is what I'm thinking. Almost like a retirement plan for somebody who's had a million jobs and doesn't really have a traditional career path.
Well, good for you. I mean, as somebody who suffers from very bad anxiety, I always like to applaud people who are training to work in that sector and to help people who are in need.
Yeah, I also suffer from really bad anxiety, so I am excited to be able to be in that position as somebody who I think a lot of us who are in this work are people who have experienced it from the other side as well, right? I think that's why we're called. But this was also something that I've wanted to do even when I was just teaching yoga. When yoga teaching was my primary job, it seemed like people needed more the sort of counseling side of things than they needed the yoga. That's what they were after class. They were staying to tell me things like, well, this sequence that you did was great. It really helped, but it brought up these feelings. And I'm wondering if you could help me with these feelings. And I'm like, well, I'm not, this is, not what I'm licensed to do. Right. I wanted to be able to offer more to the students that I'm working with at the high school now, students that I've had in yoga, because that seems to be more of what people need. I mean, I could now, in theory, do yoga therapy, once I am what I feel properly licensed to do that.
Yeah. Well, and not to overstate the obvious, but we're in such a crisis point with youth, especially. I mean, so many people, but especially our youth are processing so much and just in such a kind of still unfolding trauma with all of this moment and all that we're facing. So yeah, it's great to be taking this up and be able to be there for them in the
Yeah.
next many years, especially.
Yeah, I really feel that being in the school with them. I think that there was great pressure for us to go back to school, which in many ways does feel like the right decision, right? People wanted that normalcy. But what I hear from parents about how, it's been great for their kids to have this normal experience. It's from parents who haven't been in the schools during this time. Like being in the school, it does not feel normal. Nothing of the past few years has felt normal. So I think it was really reassuring to some of the adults who weren't in the schools to think, oh, well, at least the kids are getting this normal thing still.
Right.
And we tried to make it very normal, but it's going to school in a pandemic. The kids have been really brave, and also terrified.
Yeah.
And now we're seeing, I'm glad that I'll have some training to continue to work with them and to help. I'm hoping to do my internship actually at the high school. So I might still be working in the same community with the same folks, which would be great.
That would be great.
So the other piece I wanted to be sure to touch on was we worked together on the LGBTQ plus Alliance here in town, but then also you were one of the first things we connected on forever ago was around anti-racism. And I know you're also serving, in addition to the other gajillion things we've been talking about, on the Human Rights Commission here in town, right?
Yeah.
So how did that start? I mean, you were talking a little bit early on about those early experiences in your school, but how did kind of a awakening to anti-racism kind of begin, and where's that for you now?
It's another one that goes way back. This is probably because I'm a Southerner, so the storytelling is part of my blood. I remember being in 3rd or 4th grade and being in the office. I was going to pick something up for a teacher because I was that student who was sent on errands sometimes. And there was a student who was getting paddled. And it was a young boy that I knew who was Black. And our principal who was doing the paddling was this big old white guy. And he was, it wasn't a gentle paddle, not that there's such a thing, but he was beating that child. And I saw it. And I knew that there was some layer to it that was deeper than what I was seeing. But I couldn't put my finger on it. Right. And I saw lots of things like that. It was a really, I've always been kind of a raw nerve. My mom used to tell me I was too sensitive, right? But I would feel and see things that other people didn't seem to feel and see. And I would see my friends who were Black being treated differently by the white people who had power as a child. And when I would bring that up with my grownups, they would gaslight that. They would say, well, you're just being too sensitive. It's not what you think it is. It's, So I knew from an early age, though I also knew that there was some reason that white old adults, elders didn't want to talk about it. So then when I was a teenager and I had my best friend brought me over to her house. She was Black, and her mom, the very first question, she asked me what music I listened to, and I told her Def Leppard. Again, I'm dating myself, right?
Nice.
And David Bowie. Yeah. She was like, yeah, but what Black people do you listen to? And I was like, and I just couldn't think of any. I did listen to them, but at that house, we could talk about white and Black, and it became clear, like from the very first question, it became clear, we can talk about it here. So that was a piece. And then I moved up north, and I thought moving up north, everybody was enlightened and it was going to be just gorgeous and beautiful and everybody would get along. And lived in Somerville, and there seemed to be, a good mixing of people in our neighborhood. But then Fred and I had this habit when we first moved here of hopping on the train and just going and just getting off at different stops, right? And just because we didn't know anything about anywhere, and this was before Google. And we would get off at different stops and we say, oh, this is a different neighborhood. Oh, these are different groups of people in these areas of town. And realizing through that this was more segregated than anywhere I'd ever lived before.
Yeah.
And being so disappointed because that's not what I thought was going to happen. So that was another moment. And then the real moment that really proved to me that I needed to do more than just donate money to different groups that I knew were working on anti-racism stuff was when Trayvon was killed. And Trayvon was killed, a few miles from where my grandparents lived when I was a kid. And Trayvon was a boy, and Trayvon looked like so many people that I knew and who are in my family. And I, like a lot of people, I couldn't ignore, not that I was ignoring it. Yeah. I will say it that way.
Yeah.
I was donating money, but I was able to ignore it until that happened. And then I could not ignore it.
That's interesting.
And we just had his anniversary of his death recently. And every year when it comes up, I want to do more, so, that was really hard, but I was pleased. Again, the church comes up here. Another reason that I love our church, when I was young and Catholic and skipping church, and my mother would make fun of people who went to church to network. She said, oh, they're just going to church to stay after and talk about their businesses. At our version of the coffee hour.
I was going to say.
And so we never stayed, right? We never stayed for it. And so I didn't know what they were really talking about. But, Catholicism also has a social justice component. It's different than ours, but that's part of it. So when we got here to the church here in town, and I realized, if I work with these people who are working on these initiatives, we have more power. And these people have been doing it longer. There's so many great people who have so much experience that they know who to call. They already have greased the wheels. I've been trying to sort of recreate wheels and do this on my own and learning things from scratch on my own, but in community where you have more power. And that's what coffee hours for. That too, right?
Yeah. That's great. And so then how long have you, I know I've felt the same thing, collaborating with the LGBTQ plus Alliance and, Fran Yuan and Gladys Unger, who have been at it for just decades, just decades.
I mean, Fran started it. How can you,
and Catherine Bonfilio and Belmont, against racism. So many people have been working beyond Ferguson folks. We've had so many people working so hard for so long. It's really wonderful to get to collaborate. And so I wonder, this moment in the work of the Human Rights Commission, this moment in anti-racism, what is it you think that's different, or what do you think that's dawning, or what do you think that's changing, or what do you think we're kind of called to now?
I've been really excited that more and more people are learning about intersectionality, which was even a new concept. It was a new concept for me too, a few years back. And so I certainly am not an expert, but looking for those who are most affected by the systems of power, who are most held back by systems of power through those intersecting identities, is what brought me, there's a lot of things that brought me to focus on trans rights and the LGBTQ Alliance. So yes, anti-racism work, and yes, doing everything I can for Black trans women and disabled trans people, like looking for those intersections and where people might not have a voice, where people might not have access to something like the Human Rights Commission that I serve on, being able to have this privilege to just show up at town hall and tell them that I want to volunteer for the Human Rights Commission.
Right.
Which not everybody doesn't know that we exist still, but not everybody knows that you can just volunteer and be on it. Like they're looking for people. Right.
Right.
I think that what we're called to do now is figure out who's still not at the table.
Yeah.
And I think, we're called to, some of us are called to get out of the way a bit.
Yeah.
I would love to give up my seat at the table to somebody who hasn't had a voice.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
I totally agree. And I really appreciate, I just read, and I think we linked it in the letter that I wrote about Ukraine, but there was this, if you Google Side with Love, Texas, Ukraine, there was this beautiful article that somebody wrote about how the legislation around trans youth in Texas and making, gender affirming medical care available for children and youth, how that was linked to the sort of power systems that are creating war in Ukraine. And it was just a beautiful example of what we're talking about, that nothing exists in a vacuum, and that all of the work that we do in any realm for justice and freedom and peace, and all of this is woven, all of anti-racism is woven, all of this is woven together. And, I think I totally agree. I think this moment is one of seeing those connections and not, not being satisfied with just looking at one thing at a time. And it's super hard, but I am hesitate to say hopeful, but I am hopeful. When we met with the LGBTQ plus alliance with the GSA, the gender sexuality, what is it, alliance? I forget what they're called. At the middle school, and there was 40 youth in the room supporting each other, and they identify in all sorts of different ways, right? But still 40 youth were there supporting each other, loving one another, showing up for one another. And that, I don't know, that was definitely a hopeful moment to see that momentum and see those folks there together. So
this is one of the reasons that I love working with the youth at the high school is it's such a new generation. And I too, Chris, get a lot of hope from working with them because they understand intersectionality. To us old folks, it's new. And, the concept is still, I stumble on it sometimes. But for them, even in a school district like ours that, on the surface doesn't look that diverse, they are looking to create alliances across those barriers that I was seeing as a kid that were more like, impenetrable walls, right? But the youth today don't see it that way and haven't seen it. I don't know that they've seen it that way here. We're in a bubble, right? But what I see at the high school, I see people who are willing to live pretty authentically as themselves out loud in a way that my LGBTQ friends in high school were not able to. I see their friends groups accepting that and embracing that. I see students talking about mental health and their own struggles in a way, I was taught to keep those kinds of things under wraps. We don't talk about that. We don't talk about that we have anxiety or, whatever our other things that we're working through might be. And kids in the classes that I'm in will tell a teacher in front of the class, will say, I didn't turn that in because, I needed to take some time for myself. Like, wait, what? It blows me away. But yes, you needed to take some time for yourself. So you couldn't, I don't know. And they're just really open And also really, not all of them, but a lot of them are able to speak out for each other, speak out for themselves, in a way that I find really hopeful. And Chris, you helped me feel really hopeful. First time we met, you told me that in this work, it's a marathon. I can't remember how you put it, but you told me that in this work, you have to celebrate the small things, because I was really frustrated about something when we were meeting at the very first moment, something that I was working on that wasn't working out. And remembering in your voice, celebrate the little things, has gotten me through quite a few things where I'm frustrated. It's not moving as fast as I want it to. We could be doing so much more. There's Chris's voice. Celebrate the small things.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, certainly if anybody listening wants to dig into some of this work, either with the Human Rights Commission or Belmont Against Racism or Beyond Ferguson or any of these groups or the LGBTQ plus Alliance, Jess or I can help you get connected to the folks who can bring you in.
Yeah.
So one of the fun things in addition that we've been doing is if you have any questions for either Sam or I, you can
about anything.
Anything.
I have a question for you both. Well, everybody doesn't know, but you two know that I'm very interested in gender. And it's one of the reasons that I enjoy being on the LGBTQ Alliance. So I wanted to talk with you both about gender, because I'm always very interested in how people are performing their gender out in the world. And I'm really particularly interested right now in finding examples of folks who identify as men, who are able to be different kinds of men than what we have seen sort of narrowly defined in our culture. So I view both of you as very open and compassionate and gentle beings. And I know that this must have been hard for you at some point. I'm guessing that this must have been hard for you at some point, because that is not necessarily how we have raised our boys and men to be in our culture. Do you have thoughts on that?
Chris, do you want to go first?
Sure.
I got to think about this. I got to percolate a little more on this one.
Raised by a very emotive, compassionate, I'm 45, so I was born in 1976. So I was definitely raised, not quite, my mother and my father, but really my mother and some friends of hers used to do workshops on like androgyny, right? So I was definitely, raised in sort of gendered clothing. But if ever I was said, oh, I want to wear this dress, they would 100% allow me to celebrate me, So I was definitely raised in a supportive bubble and raised to be able to cultivate all the different aspects of my being, and an only child. And so my relationship with my mother was very central. And I was raised in the Framingham UU church, 0 to 18. And so I was raised in a very free to be you and me, like, I forget the name of, Johnny has a dolly or something, like there's some song. Yeah. So like that was the soundtrack to my childhood, was very much like, and I had baby dolls and I had tons of stuffed animals and I had, so they did all of that. And, I'm like a bearded, cisgendered, male who's like fishes and goes to the woods and, splits wood and, builds fires and all these things. So while I inhabit, and I should say, when I go to the woods to do all those things, I'm like the long-haired, city-fied, like I'm not like right there with the hunters up in northern Maine, like they definitely are like, who is this guy? But it's an interesting balance to both inhabit all that. And I, had long hair for quite a while, and so would be misgendered quite a bit from the back. I remember the very first concert I ever went to with the very first girl that I ever loved. We jumped the fence at Great Woods to see Tom Petty, and she had like done this a bunch of times and it was very cool. And I was like terrified to do it, but I was like, whatever, it's great. and we were sitting on the lawn. I remember, and we were kissing, and somebody walked by, and they were like, "Ew, two girls, gross." This was many years ago. We just chuckled about it for years and years because, but yeah, no, I've always felt really grounded in, and I also have my job as a minister is naturally one of gentleness and compassion, and it definitely calls out and cultivates and celebrates a lot of those. Not necessarily traditionally, male qualities, but so it's always been kind of a comfortable place for me.
Can I add a question
Yeah.
about your peers as a kid? Because what we found with our kids, we raised them to be gentle, children, and the peers didn't always accept that, especially when they were young.
Oh yeah.
You remember any pushback from?
Oh yeah.
I
remember. I again am an only child, so all of my bumping up against other people was all in schools and stuff. But I remember the Fenn School in Concord, which is a boys' school that I went to for 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, was the first time I had ever hit anyone, and it was like, again, this is all boys. It starts in 4th grade, goes through 9th grade. It's a wonderful school. I learned a lot. That's where I started to do theater. And so I grew in so many different ways, and music and all sorts of great stuff. But walking the halls, it was like a, action of endearment to punch each other and give each other dead arms. Like, you would hit somebody right beneath the deltoid, whatever, the top muscle, and you could send a sort of numbness through the arm. And I just had never had that as a greeting. And I was like, what is this place? Like all of these, and we were like in jackets and ties, and it was all this weird sort of New England prep school thing that I was dipping a toe into. And I was just terrified. So it was very odd, this kind of performative, aggressive male, and it was all boys, like I said. So it was like, it was very strange to get used to, but I did. I mean, and like I said, I did a lot of theater. So my central experience and my central communities were always sort of more artistic and more kind of, supportive. But yeah, it was definitely, I remember learning to punch people in the hallways that I liked. And I was like, okay, this is what we do here. All right. Punch. But it was strange.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Sam?
I don't think I've got a lot of personal experience to talk through, but I do. Something that really interests me, I guess also worries me a bit, is there's this phenomenon that I sort of vaguely think of as gender fragility, a bit like the white fragility that I think we've become more cognizant of in recent years. There's across America, and I think where I come from in the UK and probably in other places too, there's a sort of very defensive posture of gender's changing, gender roles are changing, gender expression is changing, and this is frightening. And we've got to push back against it, or everything, civilization's going to crumble or something. It's this very fragile, very very emotional and very defensive. It's not even really an ideology. It's very emotional, and I see it a lot, of course, politically on the right, and from a lot of it's in our culture, a lot of cultural commentators and sort of people in the media and of course in politics. There's this fear that men are being emasculated, and I don't really understand where it's coming from. But I've made the observation that with a very small sample, a very narrow sample, which is that last semester I was co-teaching a class at my university, and my students, who are all first years, they don't have that. They have they as sort of echoing Jess here, but they're very, very open-minded, and they're not fragile people. Not about this. And this fragility that I see in the culture, that I read about, that I see on TV and so on. I wonder if it's generational. I wonder if it's regional. I want to understand that better, because I want to it's it's a culture war, which is a cliche, but Why are people so angry and frightened and defensive about men and women styling themselves in different ways, acting in different ways, expressing their gender in different ways? Why should that be a threat? I don't get it.
Well, I appreciate what you say about it being. I don't think the piece that I see being generational is I've experienced in my own family. We, in the last 2 years, two of my nibblings, which is like my favorite word now, which is a non-gendered, my many years ago nieces, both two of them out of many of them have come out as non-binary, and so now you get to call them nibbling, which is like just the most adorable little word, but the kids, the youngest generation in the family made the switch. They were like, oh yeah, so they're non-binary, great, okay, so now we just they them, like what are the pronouns, They just like boom, switched on a dime. And all of the rest of us, like anybody over 30, it's been like, oh wait, what? It's a nibbling? What? What is that? What is that word? And we've been like, oh, and everybody, so it's just a journey, but it's amazing the cultural assumptions that now, all of so many of kids of that generation now have somebody in their immediate family, somebody one step away in their wider family, who are either non-binary, trans, whatever. And so that's just part of the water that everybody's swimming in under a certain age. And there's no, huge cognitive transition that, my mother, who has had these grandbabies for, decades upon decades upon decades, like that's a bit of rewiring in her brain, in her, not young brain, and that's a different thing. But so I think generationally there is a bit of a difference, just in the cultural assumptions and the way things. I don't know. It's
also as the English professor in the room, I'm telling everyone who's listening, they them pronouns can be grammatically singular. They just can. I'm sorry. Someone knocks on the door, and I say, whoever's at the door, tell them to sod off. That's a perfectly grammatical sentence, but them is grammatically singular. That's we've been saying that for hundreds of years. There's nothing wrong with that.
Okay. Isn't it slightly unkind to say those, Sam? Like tell him to sod off.
Tell him to sod off. Sorry, that's a British.
Tell him the English teacher told him to. Thank you so much for coming on, and thank you for all that you're doing. Both for the church, but then also for our town and for the kids and for everybody. This has been a real joy to get to collaborate with you in so many ways, and looking forward to many, many more years of great work together. So yeah, thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Sam, for everything.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks so much, Jess. This was a wonderful conversation. It was great to hear more about your background and your spirituality and the good that you're doing in the world. Thank you.
And little Jess reading the Bhagavad Gita in orange trees.
Yeah, that'll stay with me.
Yeah.
While skipping church.
If I ever skip church, you can look for me under a tree. Well, not right now. It's a little cold for me, but yeah, I'm under a tree.
And if you've never smelled orange trees, put it on your life bucket list, because it's a wonderful experience. Thanks, as always. Thanks so much for listening. If you have any questions you'd like us to wrestle with or dance around or with, you can email minister@uubelmont.org. We have a couple more wonderful conversations coming your way this season. But yeah, thanks again, Sam and Jess, and we'll talk to you real soon.